You know, when most people think of Spain, they picture sun, beautiful plazas, maybe some festivals. But for decades, right underneath that idyllic surface, a secret and absolutely brutal war was being fought. A war where the lines between law enforcement and, well, state-sponsored terror became dangerously blurred. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Strategic Labs, the channel where we deeply analyze the ideas, narratives, and strategies behind the documents. Today, we are going to dive into the material we have on the table. Before we start, please leave a like, share the episode, subscribe to the channel, and remember to check the description for the links to access the original material. Also, before we begin, I want to ask you something. As we go through this analysis, think about this. Do you believe what we're about to explore represents a smart strategic move or a serious mistake? Let us know in the comments. I really want to see how you think about this. And this quote from our source material just perfectly captures what we're doing today. We're literally peeling back that beautiful postcard image of Spain, and underneath, we're going to expose this ruthless, high-stakes world where intelligence isn't just a tool. It's the sharpest and, honestly, the most decisive weapon on the board. Okay, so let's just start by shattering that illusion of peace. This wasn't a conventional war. There were no front lines, no uniforms. It was fought entirely in the shadows. We're talking about whispers in crowded cafes, midnight raids on quiet suburban streets, and encrypted communications buzzing right through the heart of Spain's biggest cities. Now, this whole conflict didn't just pop up out of nowhere. As you can see, it was kind of a slow burn through the 60s and 70s. But the one event that changed everything, the absolute point of no return, was the 1973 assassination of Carrero Blanco. This was so much more than a political killing. It was a brutally precise message that proved nobody was safe, and it sent Spain's entire security apparatus into a complete frenzy. And this right here is the critical point. For the Spanish state, this wasn't just a successful attack by their enemy. It was a catastrophic, humiliating intelligence failure. It forced them into this complete top-to-bottom recalibration. They had to accept a brand new, brutal reality. Spain was now a clandestine battlefield, and all the old rules were officially out the window. So how does a state even begin to respond to a failure of that magnitude? Well, you don't just try harder. You build a machine. You engineer this complex, multi-agency apparatus designed for one thing and one thing only, to hunt in the shadows. So let's break down the key players who made up this machine. It's really easy to look at this and just see a list of government agencies, right? But the real power, the real weapon here, wasn't any single one of them. It was the synergy between them. Think of it like this. The CNI was the strategic brain, and the Guardia Civil was the tactical fist. And it was the fusion of that intelligence with that force that turned fragmented pieces of data into actionable and, very often, lethal operations. And this cycle, this became their well-oiled machine. It shows a really clear, hard-won evolution, from just being reactive, waiting for an attack, to being proactive. It was a systematic approach designed to dismantle these cells from the inside out. But the key thing to remember is that this smooth process was forged in the fire of absolute failure. This shift, right here on the screen, from these isolated, siloed agencies to an integrated fortress, this is the entire story of the state's response. The Spanish government learned, in the most brutal way possible, that this shadow war could only be won through absolute, seamless coordination. But here's the thing about a war fought in the shadows. As the state adapted, so did its enemy. And this brings us right to the core dynamic of this entire conflict. It wasn't a static war at all. It was a perpetual chess game, a constant, brutal cycle of action, reaction, and evolution from both sides. Let's take a look at how this deadly game actually played out. So the moment the state got really good at listening in on their communications, what did ETA do? They went quiet. They developed these incredibly sophisticated methods of coded language and clandestine exchanges that forced intelligence agencies to go way, way beyond simple wiretaps. So, what the state did next is the crucial point. They didn't just try to listen harder. They shifted from reacting to predicting. They started hunting the patterns, not just the people, combining high-tech surveillance with really deep psychological analysis to try and get one step ahead of the game. This next move? This was a truly sinister evolution. The insurgents began to weaponize the very fabric of society, using ordinary cars on ordinary streets, making them almost impossible to detect.
And this forced the state into a terrible choice. You act, and you risk civilian lives, or you hesitate, and you risk a successful, devastating attack. I mean, what would you have done in that situation? Let us know down in the comments.
And ultimately, technology just wasn't enough to solve that dilemma. The state's most effective countermeasure was a return to the oldest tool in the spy book, putting a human being deep inside the networks. This was an incredibly high-risk, high-reward strategy that, more often than not, really paid off. And this is where the story gets really, really complicated, because the state's adaptation took a much darker, much more controversial turn. It pushed this conflict into a morally ambiguous territory that, honestly, it challenges our entire perception of this war. So, to fight an enemy that operated completely outside the law, elements within the Spanish state decided to do the exact same thing. And this brings us to one of the most controversial, most debated aspects of this entire conflict. Let's be perfectly clear about what you're seeing on the screen here. These were not police units. These were covert retaliation squads operating with a cloak of official secrecy and plausible deniability. Their mission wasn't about arrests and trials. It was about extrajudicial killings and assassinations, period. And this right here, this brilliantly illustrates the central dilemma of the whole thing. How can a democratic state claim to be defending itself by using the very methods it says it opposes? This wasn't just a tactical shift anymore. This was a profound ethical one, a decision to literally mirror the enemy's brutality. You know, the source itself really highlights this moral gray zone. From a purely operational perspective, Gale's actions were ruthlessly effective. They completely shattered ETA's sense of invulnerability in their safe havens across the border in France. But the question always remains, at what cost? Do you consider this effective, or is it just plain risky? So all this relentless pressure from decades of intelligence ops, including that brutal, dirty war, it eventually led to the collapse and dissolution of ETA. But this wasn't the end of the story. The source material makes a powerful argument that this type of conflict never truly ends. It just transforms. The battlefield has simply shifted. It's moved from the streets of the Basque Country into the global digital realm. The faces and the names of the enemy might have changed, but that fundamental war in the shadows continues. That intelligence machine, built over decades of bloody conflict, had to evolve once again to face all these new complex threats. And this really is the ultimate takeaway from what we've looked at today. This decades-long covert war has left these invisible scars all over Spain's national fabric. It has fundamentally shaped its security landscape, its politics, and its very identity in ways that we are only now, decades later, beginning to fully understand. We've reached the end of this analysis, but before you go, I want your perspective. Do you think what we analyzed today reflects strategic intelligence or a systemic failure? Leave your opinion in the comments. I read them all. If this episode added value to your day, please leave a like, share it, and subscribe to Strategic Labs so we can keep deconstructing narratives. Remember to check the video description. See you in the next analysis.